Hello and welcome back to UML Operator. This is the fourth part in our series on modeling practices. In our first episode, we kicked off the series, which included my own best practices. In our next episode, we went into practices around choosing the right diagram type. Then in our third episode, we got into baseline practices, which we had to break up into three parts so that we could cover as much as possible. In this episode, we're going to step through creating and managing relationship or connections between elements, which include packages, diagrams, and all elements. I have a playlist on model relevance, and we'll try to include the link down below in the description. I believe all modelers need to watch these episodes to help them effectively progress in computer-aided software engineering and UML. So let's get started. In the previous episode, we talked about using clear naming conventions and to document your elements explicitly, effectively, and efficiently. And in relationships, everything applies. You have to use good naming conventions for your relationships between elements. You have to document these relationships explicitly in a clear and detailed manner, leaving no room for confusion or doubt, or to the best of your knowledge at that particular time. You may start your work effort, your modeling effort off with a simple whiteboard exercise, and then later on bring in other elements from an asset repository, patterns, or exchange import that help you understand what the elements are that you're dealing with in a particular scenario. So once you bring the elements in and they start to fit the mold for the requirements that you have and the things that you're dealing with in your particular delivery exercise, you're going to start drawing connections between these elements so that they fulfill the project objectives. While your assets may contain intelligence from an asset repository or whatever contributions that were made, they're really not serving any purpose when it comes to delivery and design if they do not have any connectivity, if they do not have any relationships. So if there's no relationships, it's hard to tell your story about what's taking place between these elements in your modeling effort. Even worse, if you do start to draw in connectivity between the elements and you're just flying along drawing boxes and lines with no intelligence behind those lines, then you're really wasting your time because you're not telling your story. Essentially, whatever you're creating is going to be empty. It's going to be blank. Your stakeholders are going to be left with trying to understand, well, what's taking place in this model? What are you doing to solve particular problems? You could have as much intelligence as you want, tag values, stereotypes, etc. But in your associations, your connectivity, if there are no intelligence whatsoever, and they're completely blank, then your stakeholders are not going to understand. You're not going to understand the purpose between these particular sources and destinations. Whether you're in hand-drawn mode or work finishing the draft in your final solution or model product, you want to ensure that you're putting intelligence in your relationships so that they will be meaningful to the particular stakeholders from the very beginning to the end within your project. So when you go to run your reports or do other analysis, that you're able to understand not only what the elements are, but what's taking place in those elements in each particular scenario. So you put intelligence between the source and the destination. You put intelligence in there so that it's very clear to the stakeholders what is taking place within the architecture. So as you're drawing in your relationships in your model, you're solving a particular requirement that's necessary for the project You need to ensure that as soon as you draw an association, any type of connector, you're opening up and you're putting in a reason why you need to do this. So customer accesses e-com. Just put in a note, why'd you draw that relationship in? And you may find that, well, in order for them to connect to the e-commerce site, they may actually need to go through Service Exchange before they can get to the e-commerce site. So be sure to draw in you might say something like all e-com services are accessed through Services Exchange. Even abbreviating it SE as Service Exchange is better than nothing at all. Then you can always come back and clean up the relevance between your elements as you're trying to understand, well, what is this diagram? What is this model depicting? This applies to even external elements. You may be doing requirements analysis and bringing in requirements, trying to determine which application is going to implement or realize a particular requirement. So as you're bringing in these requirements, you're trying to tell your story. I would not simply draw in or bring in elements and then draw realization to or from those elements if you're not going to put some sort of meaning behind the elements. You may find that when you're modeling this way and you're coming in and you're putting intelligence in your realization associations or any other connectors, you may find, well, wait a minute, we're missing requirements. We're missing solution. It is not just the product catalog, in this case, implementing this requirement. Service Exchange also has a meaningful need in order to accomplish this. Now, when you go to share your particular model with other stakeholders, they're able to understand what's taking place within the model. They're able to go into particular views, relationship views, if you will. Let's go ahead and save this, only look at connected items, on what's taking place between the source and the targets in this case. So you see the requirements across the top, and you see that e-commerce is realizing this requirement, product catalog is realizing this requirement, but also Service Exchange is realizing this particular requirement. And you have the intelligence behind the connector, the relationship, that tells the stakeholders, even yourself when you return, that day, the next day, a week, month, or 6 months later. Then in your baselines, Control, Alt, and B, let's compare back to previous version of this, show differences. We're able to see that connections were added for realization for these requirements that are down here. So it becomes easier for the stakeholders to understand what's taking place. And if you happen to be in Sparx 17, you're able to look at the progression of models, their connectivity, their additions that are added in intelligence, and even the connections between the requirements and a particular elements in real time. Let's go ahead and remove these requirements from the diagram. Of course, we're not removing these from the project. Let's hit save. Let's hit function key 8 and run a new report. So we're running a report on solution architecture. It is going to be called solution architecture. Let's go ahead and overwrite the previous report if you're not versioning, and then let's generate. So now when you're running this report with the relationships that you have in there, it's very clear to see what the model is, what the elements are, what their extensions are from stereotypes to tag values, as well as what the connections are between all the elements in your model. All right, we're going to wrap up now. In the next episodes that are coming up, we're going to be talking about journaling everything. So that's going to be elements and your connections, your relationships. We're going to then get into more than one Sparx instance. This is where data relevance, both horizontally and vertically, your relationships is very critical. When we get into brainstorming, we're going to be able to jump more into requirements development, requirements engineering, simulation, building on scenarios based on those brainstorms. And then we get into an episode on Kanban and managing properties. Those could be properties such as tag value properties and so on. And then the final episode, we're going to get into dealing with more than one large project. So, and that's getting into not just Sparx tooling, but interacting with, I want to say integrating, but interacting is a better term, for other tools other than Sparx. And managing your relevance, your relationships gets very interesting when we get into that one. So we're going to be touching more. We're going to be talking about ORM, which is object relationship management. We're going to talk about modularize your schema because you are built on a database. We're going to get more into version control and back into baselining and so on now that we're talking about practices relevant to connections or relationships. And then we're going to be talking in a couple of the episodes, I'm not sure we're going to fit it in, about monitoring and auditing relationship usage, as well as other elements, but especially when it comes to relationships, because your connectors between even two elements can become very verbose. You can have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have to make decisions on whether you're going to use unspecified direction, directional, unidirectional, all that fun stuff. So that gets kind of interesting. And then we'll probably close in the last episode by touching again on training and educating your stakeholders, including yourself, aligning with your practices, your modeling practices. But I could talk for hours on connection, so I want to keep this one a little shorter than the last couple. So I really look forward to getting into that. Comments, questions down below. All right. Let us know what challenges you're having. Are you using tools other than Sparx, and how are you dealing with boxes and lines? I can't wait to get into Plant UML and Draw.io. Previous company I worked with that I retired from used Draw.io extensively with Atlassian products like Jira. They had Atlassian Wiki, and they would do their modeling in Draw.io, and then they would do all of their documentation in Wiki. And I thought that was extremely counterproductive. I could model 10 times faster in Sparx, and the data is far more usable, which takes us back into potentially a conversation around normalize where appropriate and denormalize when necessary. And denormalization of data is definitely going to happen when you get into extract, transform, and load. You're transporting your Sparx or other modeling tool intelligence into your data warehouse for analytics and advanced analytics. So, wow, we have so much to talk about, but I really want to get into other tools so that we can see the differences and the power in the practices that we're using to deliver our visions, our projects. All right. So until that next episode, happy modeling.